Welcome one, welcome all to Unity Church-Unitarian. Welcome you hardy Minnesotans who brave the frozen temperatures and tundra to be with us here in person, and welcome to those of you watching online. Everyone is welcome here wherever you are, wherever you're from, whether you're here in person watching us online. Your gifts and your wounds are welcome here. I'm Reverend Kathleen Rollens. I'm serving as the interim senior minister here at Unity Church-Unitarian, and I'm sharing today's worship service with our worship associate, Jess Goff. We hope that you find Unity Church to be a place that helps you find and keep your balance, and a community that inspires you to lead a life of service, integrity, and joy. We gather together this day to ground ourselves in personal spiritual practice and communal worship that grows our capacity for wonder and spiritual deepening. We gather together this hour to know each other in our fullness and to create an ever-widening circle of belonging. We are so glad that you're here, and we now enter into this time of worship with the pealing of our bell to center us in presence.
Thank you so much. We gather together today to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but even more than that, we gather because we strive to build the world we dream about, a dream that is ever present and ever elusive. We come together as purveyors of peace, as students of hope, and as leaders of love. Each week, we kindle the flame in this chalice. If you know the words that the children speak when they light their chalice, say them with me now. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith, the light of truth and the warmth of love. Come, let us worship together. Please join me in responsive reading number 593 in the back of your hymnal. Liberation. Liberation is costly. Even after the Lord had delivered the Israelites from Egypt, they had to travel through the desert.
They had to bear the responsibilities and difficulties of freedom.
There was starvation and thirst, and they kept complaining.
They complained that their diet was monotonous.
Many of them preferred the days of bondage and the flesh pots of Egypt.
We must remember that liberation is costly. It needs unity.
We must hold hands and refuse to be divided. We must be ready.
Some of us will not see the day of our liberation physically.
But those people will have contributed to the struggle.
Let us be united. Let us be filled with hope. Let us be with those who respect one another. Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. So now we take a moment to settle ourselves, to pause, to breathe, to enter into this time of meditation, reflection, or prayer, as is your practice. We know that joy and woe are indeed woven fine. They weave in and around our lives, and we bring these to this beloved community to hold in care, to celebrate in gladness, and to hold all that is our life. We give our thanks and our praise as we generously give and openly receive compassionate care in times of joy and sorrow and transitions. So this morning we hold and carry Mary Picard, who has been valiantly fighting cancer for several months and is having surgery on Thursday, January 18th, in the hopes of winning the battle. Mary appreciates all the love and support and healing prayers of her Unity community. And I'm sad to report that William Gray, Bill Gray, a longtime member and former trustee of Unity Church, died this morning after a long illness. In his final days, his children, grandchildren, family, and friends gathered with him, talked, laughed, ate good food, just like he would have done. Bill was predeceased by Katie Gray, the love of his life, and survived by his 7 children and 14 grandchildren. A celebration of Bill's life will be held in the springtime. Our human condition includes the truth that on any given Sunday there may be one among us who is facing cancer and another mourning the loss of a beloved. There may be one among us who is struggling with mental health and another trying to embody and embrace the spiritual practice of raising children. Someone right now is worried about making ends meet, and another may be concerned about a loved one in prison. There may be one among us who has wounded others by their addiction, and one who is celebrating another decade of recovery. There may be one among us who is right now facing their final days. We support them in this time of transition, a time that requires curiosity and courage and honesty. We hold all in care and more as we pray for the peoples of this courageous congregation, and as together we live into our longing to embody and help build beloved community. I invite you now to speak aloud the names of those whom you wish us to hold in care. Christine, Mike, Greg, sick and suffering. Holy One, Spirit of justice, we are so grateful to be together this day in beloved community, in the struggle for justice, and in the shared power of community who organizes their dreams into deeds of action and service. Be with us now, O Spirit of life, as we create brave space to confront evil and dismantle the forces of dominant culture that bind us to principalities and powers beyond our making. As we honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., may we also remember this day, this weekend, the thousands of unnamed women and men and persons who put their bodies and lives on the line for the hope and the promise of true freedom and equity. Dr. King went to the mountaintop. He saw the promised land, and he reassured us that we will get there one day. That day has not yet arrived, yet it can and it will with our effort. May that be no paradisal dream, but a reality in our own time. So we enter now into a time of silence, knowing that it is in silence where great things often fashion themselves. May it be so.
I've been thinking about hands. And in the South Korean culture of my childhood, you would never have your hands stuck inside your pant pockets when you're talking to an elder, because that would come across sort of arrogant and rude. And in that culture, whenever an elder would give me something, I was taught to receive it always with two hands. And if you're trying to call someone over to you, you wouldn't stick your hand out and this index finger curling towards you as a way of doing it, because this is what you do with pets and animals. In that culture of my childhood, you would actually do this instead. With the children that I see gathered on this cold morning, come on up front. Gather up front for the story for all ages. You look like hardy Minnesotans. And thank you for those of you who gave us such beautiful music. I've been thinking about hands. And imagine with me a very ancient culture that had their own thoughts and feelings about hands. One thing about this ancient culture was you hardly ever used the left hand in public. You would do things, you have to use it, but the left hand was sort of the unlucky hand. It was sort of the unclean hand. You would never touch someone using the left hand. It was the right hand that was the lucky hand, that was the good hand, that was the proper hand. And not only the right hand, the outside, the back of the hand, it was okay if that got dirty, but the inside, the palm of the hand, you would try your best to keep it clean because the palm, the inside of the hand, was for special things, valuable things, precious things, like the hand of a friend or like the face of a beloved. In this very ancient Jewish culture, a teacher stood up one day and said something quite strange and puzzling. If someone hits you on the right cheek, turn the other left cheek as well. What? That doesn't make sense. Is the teacher saying that you should just keep on getting beaten up and getting hit? Is the teacher telling us that somehow we can't defend ourselves and fight back? What does it mean to turn the left cheek if someone hits you on the right cheek? I invited Stanley because I think we need to get into the details and to help us. So if I'm like going to be violent and I'm going to attack Stanley, I'm not going to use my left hand because that's not what we do in this ancient Jewish culture. I'm going to be using my right hand, but I don't want to use the inside. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit Stan. Oh, that's why it's the right cheek for Stanley. If someone hits you on the right cheek, because I'm using my right hand and the back side of it. If someone hits you on the right cheek, says the teacher, turn to that person your left cheek. Okay. No, I'm not going to use my left hand. I'm still going to use my right hand. But that doesn't work as well. If Stanley is going to be turning this left cheek, this is a little awkward. I'm going to be doing... Wait a minute. If I'm going to be doing this, I'm being forced to use the part of my hand that is saved for things that are valuable and precious. This is the hand that Stanley is challenging me to touch Stanley with the thing that I use to touch what is worthwhile. Oh, I'm thinking about this because on the 7th of March in 1965, there were African American leaders and civil rights leaders, and they were marching for the right to vote in our democracy. And they were marching from Selma, and they were headed toward Montgomery. And they were hit by the violence of racism, and they were thrown to the ground. The next day, Martin Luther King Jr. arrived. And this is what he said to the people: we're going to do it again. We're going to march. And if they beat you again, turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek. It didn't mean that you just take the violence of the state and of the world, because there's a lot of violence in our world. But the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was very clear that just doing violence when violence comes to you isn't really going to change the world. He was saying by turning the other cheek, we need to use a different kind of power than violence. It is a kind of power that pauses hate and fear and says, look at my inherent worth and dignity. If you're going to deal with me, you have to deal with my inherent worth and dignity as a human being. You will have to touch me as someone who is valuable, worthwhile, and precious. I'm thinking about that as we remember and celebrate and practice what Reverend King taught all the people in the world. Because he was taught by Gandhi, who was also taught by this rabbi named Jesus, who teaches us to practice a different kind of power that is so necessary in our world that has violence in too many places. I'm thinking about that, as I'm sure all of us. Will the church sing and bless our children to class for this sacred work? Let's go to class.
There is this paradox in how we treat Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Almost everyone in America reveres him left and right. There are holidays named after him, there are statues of him, streets named after him, and almost no one really reads him. There's a way in which the philosophy of nonviolence gets painted, even in King's time, as a kind of extreme, purist pacifism. And part of that is the connection with Gandhi, although I think it's a radical misunderstanding of Gandhi as well. But it's a way of imagining the commitment to nonviolence as related to passivity, as related to the performance of suffering for pity. These are things that King never endures. For him, the idea of passive resistance was a misnomer. He helped coin the phrase direct action, he and other members of the civil rights generation, that nonviolence is aggressive. When you hear King talk about love, when you hear King talk about nonviolence, these things actually require not just an enormous discipline around the acceptance of suffering, as if it's some kind of passive practice, but they require really creative, dedicated thinking around how exactly to push and prod your neighbors into addressing the forms of injustice, and how to do it in a way that doesn't leave a perpetual midnight of bitterness when the conflict is done.
Some people pushing hard, some are holding back. And ain't it a shame Some people laugh. President said we would overcome. Gotta keep on pushing till the work is done. It's been a change. It's been a change. It's been a change. Whole world's been a change. Well, there's one thing I want you to know. The things that have been ain't gonna be no more. Well, it may come late and it may come soon. One of these days there'll be a man on the moon. It's been a change. It's been a change. It's been a change. Whole world's been a change. But you young people, you stay in school, you study hard, and you follow the rules. You may be young, and you may be able. You don't get an education, you won't get a common angle. It's been a change. It's been a change. It's been a change. Whole world's been a change. It's been a change. It's been a change. It's been a change. This whole world's been a change.
It's been a change. Oh, nice. Who secretly wanted to get up and dance a little bit? Yeah, I saw you. I saw you. A little movement there. For sure. Thank you. It was fun. The day was August 11th, 2017. Place was Charlottesville, Virginia. 60 or more religious leaders were packed into a stuffy basement in a local Baptist church. And we were there to receive training in the tactics of nonviolence. What we didn't understand fully was that the next day, one of the worst outbreaks of violent protest would occur as the Unite the Right rally and counter-protesters would clash around the removal of the statue of General Robert E. Lee from a prominent park in downtown Charlottesville. That day was August 12th, but the aftermath of that event is simply known as Charlottesville. So I'd been to such trainings before, but none with this degree of seriousness. In truth, I thought that this witness would be like many of the others I'd participated in. Religious leaders would show up, we'd sing songs, we'd offer prayers, and then we would go home. Our trainers wanted to prepare us for other possibilities. This is what we expect you to do, they began. If you are screamed at, you do not scream back. If you are confronted, you do not react. If you are pushed, you do not punch. You are to link arms. You have one job, to hold the line. We will be watching you and supporting you, but if you fail to agree to these requests, we will ask that you remove yourself from the witness. Then they continued, there will be a time when some of us will undertake an act of civil disobedience by blocking an entrance to the park so that the Unite the Right demonstrators will be inconvenienced in gathering around the statue. And we are not sure what will happen at that point. But if this is something you are not comfortable with, we honor that decision and encourage you to use our safe house and a nearby restaurant if you need to withdraw from this witness. And someone kind of jokingly said to try and break the tension, so is that an order? And one trainer said, completely serious, yes, that's an order. Now, as a Unitarian Universalist, I'm not good at following orders from on high. And yet, there was something about the tone and the severity of the charge that we were given that night that made me realize this was not about me or what I thought would be the right thing to do when the Unite the Right rally came into town the next day. It was about being part of a political and spiritual witness that was bigger than my own, and that I had to be accountable to everyone else who shared those values, who had come to participate in that witness. So today's sermon is entitled The Courage of Accountability, and it's focusing on our worship theme for this month of January, which is courage. And January worship themes are often framed around some aspect of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy of leadership and service. And around the nation tomorrow and throughout the week, that legacy is remembered in ceremonies and service and acts of community connection and acts of community service. And it's also a time and when some of us spend some time studying the political and spiritual strategies of Dr. King and other luminaries of the civil rights movement, such as Bayard Rustin and Dorothy Height and Ralph Abernathy and Diane Nash, just to name a few. As we move farther away from the civil rights years and those who experience them personally, and those are fewer and farther between us, it behooves us to understand and to remember and to study and to think about what exactly made it work. How did this most effective movement for political change in America's 20th century bring about the desegregation of public institutions in the South and the Civil Rights Act of 1965? How did this movement sustain its strength? Well, the two words in the title of this sermon provide a partial answer: courage and accountability. And courage is the quality that comes to mind when you visit the civil rights historic sites or watch old TV footage being broadcast on King Day during January, images of people being berated and harassed and fire-hosed and beaten while involved in actions of peaceful protest. But courage wasn't all it took to make those demonstrations possible. For King and the leaders alongside him, accountability was also required. To stand with him, accountability to the philosophy of nonviolence that he spoke of so often and that was essential to the movement's success. That demand for accountability to this philosophy, to this spiritual practice, operated in the movement both internally within the leadership circles themselves and externally in how the movement comported itself and presented itself publicly. This is how one trainer has written about his experience of leading nonviolent action in 1963. This is from Bruce Hartford. He said, there were two kinds of nonviolent training. One was the classic Gandhian-type training, learning why and how to peacefully face and diffuse hatred and violence with courage and compassion. The main purpose of training in tactical nonviolence was to learn practical techniques of how to protect yourself from being maimed or killed while doing so. And to do this required discipline. To be effective, a demonstration has to adhere to a code of discipline so that a clear and positive message is conveyed to the public and to the press. When faced with violence, discipline is essential for the safety of everyone in the action. When a mob has surrounded you, or the cops are itching for an excuse to whip heads and bust you on felony charges, one person doing their own thing can get a lot of folk hurt. But discipline does not come easy to the kind of people who protest against the way things are, which is why that training in that discipline is so necessary. So I want to reflect more with you on this kind of accountability and discipline, not only in public witness and social justice work today, but also in the life of the church like ours. How are we to understand this role in the political and spiritual practice of accountability today? Not only in our anti-racist work, but more broadly in how we understand what it means to be part of a religious and spiritual community like this one. So I want to go back to Charlottesville for a moment and tell you one more story from that day that will illustrate the first test of discipline that I faced after our training in nonviolent resistance was over. The clergy had joined with others in town who had come to witness against Unite the Right at a worship service. So we had the training, and then we had the worship service and a rally in an Episcopal church across the street from University of Virginia grounds. That's their word for campus. The service was inspiring, and it featured leaders like the United Church of Christ leader, Reverend Tracy Blackman, and Dr. Cornel West. Our brand new UUA president, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, was there with us. And we were all pumped up. The music was loud. We were clapping and stomping. The preaching was inspiring until someone said, wait. Do you hear what's happening outside? Outside the church, you could see through the windows what looked like hundreds of tiki torches. And they were carried by young men in white shirts and khaki pants. And they were surrounding the statue of Thomas Jefferson, and they were chanting, "You will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." I wanted to go out and see for myself exactly what was happening, but the leaders told us that they were going to bar the church doors. We were told we could not leave because the organizers believed that a violent confrontation could happen between the progressive students who were also there outside countering the tiki torch carriers, the Unite the Right demonstrators, and those of us in the church. So the training we had anticipated, or the training that we did, kicked in, and I stayed put, following the instructions of our leaders, and waited together in witness and prayer. And it was the right decision. The next day, August 12th, put this discipline in practice. The religious leaders gathered at the same church at 6 a.m. for a worship service, and then we marched together to the park, only to be greeted by the out-of-town militia who had already surrounded the park. And we positioned ourselves in front of the park, flanked by those holding AR-15s who were there to provide security. And we linked arms, and we held the line. And I suspect that the fact that most of us who were there in that line were white, and that made us less of a target than if we had all been people of color. But still, it was terrifying to be that close to systemic hate and to witness the events that unfolded the rest of that day. So having the courage to be accountable to the disciplines of a faith-based movement or community is not an easy thing to do, especially when the stakes are so high and the tensions are so great. And as we locate ourselves in 2024, just 10 months from another presidential election, we must ask ourselves, does this model make sense for us today? Is this the right tool to combat the rise of white nationalism, of fascism, of active insurrection to undermine and overthrow democracy as the United States has known it for the last over 200 years? I mean, in our Unitarian Universalist community, there is a presumption that the disciplines of nonviolent spiritual witness are universally accepted and supported among us. But that's not necessarily true. One of my colleagues who was there in Charlottesville that day came for a different reason than I did. He came as a chaplain to Antifa. Antifa being shorthand for the loosely organized anti-fascist movements that rise up to counter alt-right protesters. And I want to tell you a little bit about his story and why I think it's relevant for our reflection on this Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday. I couldn't get permission to use his real name. I was unable to get permission. So I'm calling him Reverend Mike. But I remember him because we talked to him later in the day as he was tending to the bruises he had suffered in the violence that ensued when Antifa marchers collided with the Unite the Right demonstrators. And later, Mike felt it was important for him to reflect with us on why he had come to Charlottesville in a different role and with a different philosophy than that of nonviolent resistance. And he was equally committed to the disciplines of Antifa. So he wrote this. He said, "The work of anti-racism and anti-fascism are closely linked, but they are distinct parts of our overall struggle. Fascism represents those who are explicitly organized to create and strengthen the structures of total tyranny and the wholesale murder of entire peoples. They are a threat to humanity itself. Antifa only exists as a response to the violence of fascism. It has no other agenda. It exists to stop them." He continues, "Our congregations, on the other hand, exist to celebrate that which is of worth and to experiment and to model the world that we dream about, such that it can be replicated outside of them. And we have been making good strides in our collective work to own and dismantle white supremacy in ourselves, in our congregations, our institutions, and our communities in the wider world. But at the same time, we must also show up to stop openly fascist organizing, and we must do it every time." He writes, "The first fundamental point is that fascism is violence, always. The organized violence of fascism seeks to gain its strength and power by controlling public spaces. They use liberal commitments of tolerance and free speech to gain platforms for posturing and recruitment. As we have seen, when fascists are allowed to run rampant in the public space, they use every opportunity to inflict upon people the brutality they represent. Showing up as a fascist is a violent act. Anti-fascism is self-defense." End quote. Now, I just want you to know, I struggle with my colleague's opinion, and I really wrestled with this essay of his, and not because I don't share his analysis or his fear of the rise of fascism and white nationalism in our country. Still, my faith tells me I must reject the violence on the right and the left, believing, as King wrote, that when you cross the line into being physically violent with another, there is no end to it. Violence always exceeds the original justification you have for it. It expands its justifications to the point of absurdity and terror as we are witnessing the ongoing horrors in Israel and Palestine. We know this. Violence begets violence begets violence, and there is no end. So this is where we plunge into some pretty deep theological and spiritual waters. What is the right response to the deliberate attacks on values which we consider, I'm saying liberal, progressive, Unitarian, Universalists, inviolate, attacks that are rarely being fought right now with our bodies standing up to other bodies, although of course that does happen, but with hate speech, emotional terrorism and intimidation, and legislation. Examples of this are easy to find. I don't need to recite the bad news that you see on your media every day. But I do feel that all the wins that the evangelical and political right in this country have achieved since 2016 are an existential threat to the very fabric of what it means to live in a nation that aspires to and must be characterized by, guess what? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those words do not represent a program at Harvard that the right is trying to undermine and dismantle. They don't only represent that. It is a description of what we call here at Unity Church the beloved community. So how are we to be together as we face this struggle? What is our challenge to the white supremacists who march around with tiki torches, to the politicians whose stump speech says that immigrants are poisoning the blood of Americans? What to say to anti-black and brown rhetoric, cloaked in rhetoric about American exceptionalism? What is our challenge now? Well, I'm a pastor, not a politician. And a Unitarian Universalist church is a spiritual community sharing a faith in important common values, while not agreeing on every political policy proposed. But politics is ostensibly the art of turning values into legislation that build the common good. And church is one place where we get to practice and embody the values we want to see manifest in the world. It is also where we internally reflect on the world that you want to create externally. And you know this, but you can't do this by yourself. I commend the podcast that I drew the reading from to you. It's Ezra Klein, and he's interviewing Brandon Terry, who collected some important essays. It's from Harvard Press. But later on in that interview that was quoted, Brandon Terry says this. He says, quote, "I think King worried about the fact that so much of the questions of management of emotion, the building of character, has become a privatized practice. On the other hand, in a community that's constantly talking with each other and lifting each other up and engaging in practices like song and prayer and communal rituals, to try to affirm this alternative set of ethical and political commitments against the whole rest of the culture, that's the only way it can be done. You have an alternative form of social life that can sustain you in this work. Your private practice isn't going to do it," end quote. So accountability to our values in a private and personal way is one thing, but accountability to others in partnership is, in family and church community, is a whole other. And it begins with how we behave. So this month, next month, just going to the practical, I'm going to be asking you to respond to one question. What is one behavior you do or you have observed someone else doing at Unity Church that builds a community of integrity, open-hearted engagement, and courageous action? This exercise will shape a covenant that calls everyone into accountability for their behavior and actions, not to police differences, not to suppress dissent, but rather to remind all of us that creating this thing that we refer to as beloved community takes discipline. It takes practice. It takes accountability to covenant. And it takes courage. So my hope is that through this process, you will want to be in deeper relationship with one another and know that you are held together by a common covenant of accountability. Towards the end of Nicole Hannah-Jones' book, The 1619 Project, the poet Sonia Sanchez offered a poem called Progress Report. And I tend to think of this Sunday and this weekend as a kind of progress report, as an opportunity to reflect on how are we doing as a nation to eradicate white dominant culture, to tend to the wounds of racism. What can we do? What should we do? Sanchez's longer poem provides one response. She moves in and out of despair and cautious hope. And so I leave you now with this excerpt from her poem. She says, "In this country where history and her story stretches into aristocratic silence, our black, white, brown activists have come at the beginning of the 21st century carrying the quiet urgency of a star. And the country is not the same. I say, who are these people singing down the lids of cities with color? I say, who are these people always punctual with their yes, their hearts, their hands? I say, who are these singers who resurrect summer language on our winter landscape? What is needed is to hold oneself like a sliver to the heart of the world, to interrupt, if necessary, the rhythm of the world, to upset, if necessary, the chain of command, but to stand up to the world. I do battle for the creation of a human world that is a world of reciprocal recognition. Oh, may we live that dream of a world of reciprocal recognition. Oh, may we continue to not just dream such a world, but to make it so. May it be so.
Unity Church is framed by statements of conscience known as its end statements. One of those is, generously give and openly receive compassionate care in times of joy, sorrow, and transition. Our compassionate care extends beyond the walls of the church to communities with whom we share a common interest. Each week, the larger portion of our offering goes to those community partners. This week's offering recipient, Before Racism, is a comprehensive, hands-on program that works with childcare and preschool centers, focusing on the ways very young children learn about, form, internalize, and express attitudes regarding racial identity. Before Racism designs and delivers learning experiences that will have a lasting impact on preventing the development of overt and covert bias and racism. This collection will support the purchase of curriculum materials. Will the ushers now come forward? If you are a visitor, we invite you to fill out the visitor card and put it in the plate as it passes you by. May the work of our hands and the generosity of our hearts be given in gratitude this day. Let the offering now be taken.
There's a train a-coming, don't need no baggage, just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord. strangers from coast to coast. Faith is the key, open doors and boredom, hope among those who love the most. There ain't no room for the hopeless sinner. Would hurt all mankind just to save his own. Pity on those whose chances are thinner. No hiding place from the kingdom's throne. People get ready, there's a train a-comin'. Don't need no baggage, you just get on board. All you need is faith to hear the diesels humming. Don't need no ticket, you just thank the Lord.
Oh, thank you. Love that song. Love that song. We hope you found rich meaning in today's service. Let me tell you about a couple of things that are happening both after the service and later this week that we hope you'll partake of. There's Finding Yourself at Unity, which will be a building tour today. So if you are interested in finding out more about Unity Church, please meet Barbara Hubbard, our executive director, for a building tour. Also, stop by the parish hall. Our January parish hall artist, Naomi Hart, will be at coffee hour in the parish hall today, and give her a warm welcome and learn more about her art. Check out the wonderful show. Also in Parish Hall, a couple more things. There's a holiday regifting sale, and those are new and used items donated by Unity Church members and friends with proceeds benefiting the work of Unity's Mano a Mano community outreach ministry team. And speaking of Mano a Mano, they are going to be hosting an informational meeting about their May 2024 trip to Bolivia. So you can visit and find out more about that trip in the science room today after the service to learn more about this unique travel experience. Science room is downstairs, right? Lower level, thank you, thank you. Just a couple other quick things. This is really sermon part one of a two-part series. My colleague, the Reverend Dr. Andrea Johnson, will be preaching next Sunday. She's written a really profound dissertation on Dr. King's theological and spiritual teachings. And so she'll be giving the sermon, but she's also going to be kicking off a three-part series on Wellspring Wednesday, this Wednesday. And also Wellspring Wednesday, we wrap up the Dying for Beginners series. This is an important session on the end-of-life legislation that is coming before the Minnesota legislature, likely this month. So a lot happening. Our closing hymn is one that we sing every MLK Sunday, and it has honestly achieved the status of sacred text and song. Written by James Weldon Johnson in 1900, it's become known as the Black National Anthem, and it is one that stirs the heart and inspires the spirit to work for justice and equity. So I invite you to rise as you're able, or rise in spirit and remain seated if you wish, but join me in this hymn of hope and history. Lift every voice and sing. May you go forth from this place, holding yourselves and one another accountable to the values we share, to the hopes and dreams we dream. And as our children say, the more we get together, the more we change the world, for together we will reach the stars. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth or the warmth of love, for they go with us in our hearts this day. Go in peace.